from the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Talking Catholic. This is the Talking Catholic co-host, Mary McCusker, and also the marketing coordinator for Catholic Charities, Diocese of Camden. And I'm so excited today because our guest today is a dear friend of Catholic Charities, and he's somebody who was on the podcast before, and I was thinking on the way here that he reminds me of Shrek, because in Shrek, not looks-wise, but in Shrek, he said something like, ogres are onions, they have layers, and this is what this guest today reminds me of. Every time I talk to him, there's like a new layer that peels off, and there's something so interesting that I learn. But I'll introduce him in a moment. I'm also joined by Mike Walsh, who's laughing right now. How are you, Mike?
I'm fine. You had talked about the fact that you had this intro in your head before we recorded.
A very last minute intro, but it dawned on me. I'm like, there's a lot of layers to our guest.
I've never been that close to him to think of him as oniony, but I love that reference. That's I use that reference all the time. I often will refer to things as a many-layered onion.
And, you have said that. That's right.
I am glad to see that our guest today is, because this is a 54-minute podcast. I want to make sure that we have lots of layers to delve into when we're talking to him.
Yes.
But anyway, so how are you doing, Mary?
I'm all right.
That's good to hear.
We're in the midst of a heat wave, which I'm not too thrilled about.
I hate heat waves.
I'm constantly sweating, and but other
boat.
Than that, I'm hanging in there.
Well, that's good.
Still working from home, except for right now.
Well,
we're socially distant apart for another podcast.
Yes. It has been nice, even though we can't be in the vault, even though we're vault adjacent, I do appreciate the fact that I'm at least able to be in the presence of others to record the podcast. The Zoom is fine for emergencies and quarantine, but if you can be together, I like to be together. So it's been nice.
I'm starting to get a little sick of Zoom, to be honest. I liked it at first; it was convenient, but now I don't know. Well, I miss the in-person stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same way. To be completely truthful with you, as quarantine and social distancing goes on and on and on, I miss bars so much. And I'm not like a huge drinker or anything like that, but I miss I really do miss the social aspect of our lives a little bit.
So do I.
That's why it has been
nice. And you and me are both introverts too, so that's saying a lot.
Yeah. Well, I have a sign on my wall that says something along the lines of it says, I love parties. And then the person goes, but you hate people. I was like, I know. Isn't it strange? It's true. I'm not a huge people person, but I love being around groups of people. I like just seeing life and loudness and stuff like that. And we're starting to see that a little bit more often now. Right. The churches are open. People are going to church more often. And people are trying to find other ways of getting together. And at least in the state of New Jersey, it appears we're all doing it wisely, as opposed to maybe some other states.
Safety first.
That's right. Safety first. And I am a believer. I have a science background. I consider myself a science aficionado, so
well, wait till you hear our guest.
Oh, no, I'm looking forward to it. And me, like I read astrophysics books for leisure and stuff like that, so I totally get everything going on. And the reality of the situation is we're in a predicament right now where you put on a mask, just don't be dumb. That's all you have to do. It's fairly simple precautions to be able to congregate. If it's not for you, it's
for everybody else.
Yeah, and I don't say that to be preachy. I say that to go, I want to go do stuff. And, I need everyone to kind of come with me on this journey and take care of each other. Because I as much as I may not want to speak to each of you individually, I do want to see you collectively. So, and I want you guys to go out and have fun. And my son's, his baseball team is playing tonight, as a matter of fact, finally.
Oh, wow.
So they're all, it's socially distanced baseball, which is a sort of a new
How does that work on the plates or bases?
Well, the umpires stay 10 feet behind home plate, and you actually call balls and strikes from behind the pitcher's mound instead, so you're sort of away from it. So the only time the kids are actually close to each other is when they're on base or when they're at bat. But most of them are wearing masks. You have the option to wear a mask, kind of like Major League Baseball. You have the option to wear a mask or not wear a mask, depending on your preference. The fans are all spread out along the sides. Most of them wearing masks if they're together. If they're in families, they might be maskless, but they're sort of like, cordoned off together. So everyone's trying to, kind of make do with what they can, and nobody's really, upset about it. It's new, but it's, we're all getting used to it. So
I love hearing the different ways that different, programs, sports, this place, their protocols for how are we going to make this work and stuff you don't even think of.
Yeah.
Baseball, umpire, 10 feet back. It's just...
you figure that's what the schools are trying to figure out.
But they make it work,
now.
yeah.
So, if you look at it, I realize there's a lot of things not to like about COVID and everything that we're going on with right now. But the person that I am who appreciates trying to figure things out, it's like this is one great puzzle, and we're just sort of trying to figure out how to make all these pieces fit in very unique ways. And realizing that we have to sort of hedge. A lot of people want to stay home. A lot of people want to get together. There's probably some ground in the middle that we're going to find.
Right.
But anyway, so I'm not political about any of this stuff. I'm rather agnostic about it, other than I'm reminded of something that I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say at one point, which was essentially the universe, in terms of space, not necessarily in terms of, creation. The universe really doesn't care about us one iota.
Yeah.
If a meteor or an asteroid or a comet comes crashing down on the Earth, the universe
send me into an existential crisis
or
right
the
now.
sun explodes, or any of these things happen.
It's true.
The universe will continue on.
Same thing with the Earth. It doesn't care. So be kind to Mother Earth.
That's right. But that's where it's so important for us as the inhabitants of this earth, particularly as spiritual people, and with our faith and our Christian faith.
Sure.
We do need to kind of look out for each other and think about things. And anyway, I apologize for that 4-minute rant, everybody. But I just had these sort of thoughts popping into my head over the last couple of days, and I figured I'd express them here. I have a podcast. I'm going to talk. Anyway, but we have a far more learned person on our podcast today than I. So who do we have with us today, Mary?
I'm so happy that Vinnie Mancuso is joining us. How are you, Vinnie?
I'm great, Mary. Thank you so much. And thank you for that Shrek comment at the beginning.
It wasn't looks or smell, I swear. It was the layer component.
Well, when you first said it, I was a little taken aback, but then I realized...
I saw your face. I was like, what?
So I listen to a lot of podcasts and listen to a lot of radio, and I've had this experience, maybe you guys have too, where you're used to this disembodied voice. Then when you see a picture, it's not what you expected.
Right.
And so if all the listeners who are hearing my voice but haven't seen me just picture Shrek, if they ever see me, they'll maybe pleasantly surprised. They'll be like, oh, he's not quite as smelly or scary as I expected.
But a little
the
green.
Polar opposite
green.
of Shrek. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
No,
They'll set the bar at a good place for when someone meets me. They're expecting Shrek, they'll see me, they'll be like, okay,
that's what they're picturing you. So, Vinnie, can you just give us a little... I mentioned earlier that you're a very dear friend at Catholic Charities. Can you tell us a little just introduction? I know you're a member of Our Lady of Hope Parish, right?
That's right, yep.
And can you tell us a little bit about the work you do at Catholic Charities? Because I assume some of our listeners haven't heard the other podcasts that you were on, so...
Sure. So I'm the coordinator for the English Learning Center at Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Camden. And so the English Learning Center, it's a classroom where, according to our mission statement, we try to help our students gain the confidence, knowledge, and learning strategies they'll need to read, write, and speak the English language. And so the Diocese of Camden has done a lot of great work in bringing refugees and resettling refugees here in the United States. And what we do is help the refugees learn English. And so we have mostly adults in the class. There are lots of refugee families that have come the past couple of years. And when the families come, the kids go right into school. And the kids we've seen do really good picking up English after a short amount of time because they're thrown right into school. And they pick it up, and they do great. And for the adults, it's tougher. For the adults, they have complicated schedules. They have family responsibilities, some working full-time, some are working more than full-time. And so we have our classroom open during normal times, about 4 days a week, where adults can come in and meet, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in groups, depending on what their needs are and what they're working on, and we can just help prepare them to use the English language when they're here.
Right, and that's such an important first step for anybody coming to this country. If you don't know the language, then everything else just becomes such a challenge, and you have really transformed that program over the years. It's remarkable. Vinnie runs this amazing schedule. He, rallies volunteers, and all of our clients absolutely love him. They love to learn, and it's always a treat walking by the classroom, back when we were all at the office, of course. But
Thanks so much. It means a lot, Mary. We have a lot of really great volunteers, and we have a lot of families that constantly inspire us.
Mm-hmm.
We see them. It takes a lot of courage to be in a new country. It takes a lot of courage to build a new life, and it takes a lot of courage as an adult to say, I want to come to this class and I want to learn this language.
Right.
And their life's so challenging. They constantly inspire us. They really want to learn. And, as someone who enjoys teaching, I feel like this is such a great thing to teach, because we're teaching these adults probably the most important thing they're ever going to learn again.
Right. That's
They're
true.
Americans now. They're here in America.
Right.
And learning English is going to open a lot of doors for them. And so it really motivates us, and it continually inspires us.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty, Catholic Charities is a pretty multicultural crew you get in there. It's a lot of different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Can you run off some of the list of people that you're working with?
That's right. There's a lot of people from Syria, and some from Iraq and Afghanistan and Colombia and Haiti and Burma. And let's see, Chile. We've had some people from Russia and Ukraine. So it's a melting pot, and it works out really good that way, because we have students who see other students learning English from their different perspectives they're coming from. It's not all one language they're learning. So we may have one student from Haiti slowly learning English as another student from Russia may be learning English. And they can sort of communicate to each other with English, with a new second language, and work across that. And it really helps us to build a sense of community and let the students see that there are other adults from other places in the world who are here and who are doing this. And we also have the blessing, really, of having adults at different levels. Some are absolute beginners, some are a little more advanced, and some are pretty good at English already. And so when they're all together and they're all from all over the world, it really gives us a chance to build a community and let them see that they're not alone in this endeavor, and that they can sort of draw on each other for strength.
Yeah. And as a former ESL teacher, I know that it's a rewarding feeling when you see the progress that's being made.
Absolutely.
And so, you serve as an ESL teacher right now, but can you give us a quick background of your education? Because this blew my mind after I thought I knew Vinnie, but then somebody dropped a bomb on me one day. But
so
he's very humble about this, but I like to throw it in there as my fun fact.
So like Mike, I've always liked science. And since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a scientist. I've always thought astronomy was great. When I was a kid and I saw Jurassic Park, I wanted to be a paleontologist for a while, right? I would watch Star Trek and want to learn more about outer space. And so I got to college, and I was interested in science, and I decided to settle on biology, and went with biology. And that was for a couple of reasons. I had read a lot about the history of science and knew about that, and I knew, the early 20th century was a really great time for, chemistry or physics or something. And it was feeling like where I was in world history, biology was where all the real action is in science, right? The human genome was just being sequenced as I was finishing up high school. And I started to realize, I don't mean to dump on astronomy. I don't want to annoy Neil. Neil deGrasse Tyson's going to find me on Twitter and complain to me or something. But so astronomy is great, and it's exciting, and it's amazing to study stars. But so much of it felt like, a star. There's this ball of gas 25 light years away, and there's some rocks around it. And that's really great, right? But on the other hand, we have living things on Earth growing up right now, right? We have this amazing, rich, complicated process of things constantly growing and reproducing and healing themselves and changing, and there's so much to study right there. So I got really interested in biology and genetics in particular, and so I did that as an undergrad, and then did some graduate work in cell and molecular biology at the University of Pennsylvania afterwards. And that's where I earned my doctorate. So in the course of my science career, I worked on human genetics a little bit, and I worked on model organism genetics and a couple different things.
And I failed freshman year biology in high school, so
No, I feel very at home because when I'm not learning about astrophysics, I like genetics too. I met one of the heads of the Human Genome Project when I was working for a law firm, actually about 15 years ago, and I got to be seated next to him, and all we did was talk, genetics for the entire. It was fascinating. It was outstanding. I can't remember his name. It's really annoying me. I'm gonna have to go.
He's making this up.
I was literally thinking, would it be rude if I Google his name right now so I can actually name drop him?
Francis Collins?
It might have been, actually. But hey, it was a great experience, and as we talked about earlier on this podcast, I have an affinity for science. So, I'm kind of curious, with that sort of logical brain of yours, is that something that's made helping people with language something that you think is a little easier?
Yeah,
that's a good question. Yeah.
I hope so. Let me think about this. So you know what? Like, I took the punchline of my whole science career was, after I had done this work for a certain amount of time, I really loved it. I liked the science. I could have kept it up and been very happy. But looking back over my career, my favorite thing always was teaching. When I got to mentor a younger student, or when I got to be a TA to an undergrad genetics course, or when I got to mentor some middle school students. So I learned through the science. The thing I loved most about the science, I liked doing it, but I liked most communicating it and explaining it to people. And talking to someone, people would ask me questions about my work sometimes, and they'd ask a question, and I'd be used to say in my lab where my boss asked me a question and I answered her, and a lay person would ask me a question, and I would say to myself, that question is so off base. I'm not sure even how to start to answer that. That sounds terrible. But I was so deep into my specific work, and I knew how to talk to other scientists about it. The layperson would ask, and I would say, this is so far. I have to learn to think.
Got to dumb
What's
yourself
this person
down.
Hearing? Not dumb down, but I'm just so deep down this very specific path.
Right.
To learn to say, you know what, I've got to know what I sound like to this person I'm speaking to, right? And I think language is the same thing. For example, in English, like a lot of languages, English is insanely complicated, right? And constantly changing all the time, as you can tell from listening to teenagers or whatever, right? It's always changing, and it's hard for us native speakers to keep up with it too. And so people will ask a question about language, and I will realize there's so many things popping in my head for exceptions in different cases where that means one thing, or there's sarcasm sometimes. And when you're teaching people a language, you have to be able to teach them on the level they're at and say, we'll teach them this for now, and we'll teach them really how that word's used as they develop further.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Although it does beg the question is, was it your love of teaching that brought you to Catholic Charities?
Yeah, I can't say. So I told the story last time. My plan was, I was a stay-at-home dad. So I took a break from the science career to stay home with the kids. Me and my wife were both working a lot. And I knew I wanted to be a teacher in the future, so I started staying home with the kids for a while. And when my two youngest kids started preschool, I had some more time on my hands, and my family wasn't ready for me to go back to work yet. So I decided that I wanted to do something to help people, volunteer on some project or something during the day. And so I just kind of wandered into Catholic Charities and said, I'd like to volunteer during the day. What can I do? And they told me, well, the refugee program takes volunteers. And I went to the refugee program, and they said, well, the ESL classroom takes volunteers. So I started doing that, started volunteering more and more. So it wasn't my intention to come and be a teacher, but I know I'm drawn towards the teaching. I love doing that and stuff. And so maybe that's what made me want to throw myself into it more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, what was it, how did you end up on Catholic Charities' radar?
Yeah. So, I told the story last time, but I'd be glad to tell it again. This is fun.
Well, we have new listeners. That's why we do these things.
Perfect. I'm ready to go. So when I was home with the kids, we listened to a lot of podcasts and stuff during the day, including Talking Catholic, because I noticed you guys interviewed a couple of priests I was familiar with very early on. I think I found the podcast through Twitter or something. And so one time, towards around the time when I was thinking of what should I do, where can I volunteer, what can I do with my time, you guys had Kevin Hickey on, who's the executive director of Catholic Charities. And he was talking about Catholic Charities, and I knew it was a great organization. I mean, mostly I knew it from the work of this office probably. I'd heard about it a lot from the Bishop's Annual Appeal videos. It seemed like you're doing great work there, and I'd read about it in the Catholic Star Herald, and I knew it was a great organization. And so Kevin Hickey was talking, and at the end, there was this question you guys used to ask all the time, where you would say, what's one piece of advice you would give people in their careers or something? And Mr. Hickey said that he sees lots of applications for things, and he has trouble connecting with people. Sometimes they're feeling connected with people when he just hears about their names or sees their resumes. And he recommended when you go in for a job somewhere, you should just try to talk to the boss right away. Go right in there and talk to the boss so they can know who you are, remember you, or whatever.
Right.
And so I said, okay, that's fine. So I came to the conclusion to apply to Catholic Charities, and I filled out my volunteer application and got my recommendations in order. And I, instead of emailing it, I brought it into the office. And I went to the desk where Anna was working, who I didn't know at the time, but I know now. And I said, my name is Vinnie Mancuso. I'm here to volunteer. I handed her my volunteer application. She said, okay. And I said, and I'd like to talk to Mr. Hickey, please. And I know this is a little strange. And she looked at me a little bit. And I said, well, I heard him on a podcast. And he said, if I want to work here, I should probably talk to him first. And she kind of very politely picked up the phone and made a phone call. I really like podcasts, but I know not everyone knows exactly what a podcast is. Right. And so this, I just walk in off the street, and this woman's like, I'm not sure what this guy thinks is going on or what he's hearing in his head. And so she made a phone call, and Mr. Hickey's administrative assistant, Rose, came out, and she... I know really well now. This is the first time I met her.
Right.
She came out and I was like, hi, I'm here I'm going to apply to volunteer and I'd like to meet with Mr. Hickey. And she was like, oh, he's in a meeting right now, sir. Very, very friendly. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And so then I went home, and then I came back for volunteer evaluation and introduction. And when I came back that time, at the end of them showing me around, the woman who was giving me a tour said, oh, and you can meet Mr. Hickey now. And I was so relieved, because if she didn't bring it up, I would have brought that up and said, again, I need to meet with Kevin Hickey. And so I was marching to his office, and I said hi to him and introduced myself. I didn't have much to say other than I'm volunteering, and I heard on a podcast that I should come and say hi to you.
I bet he was floored, because he used to make fun of this podcast,
oh, yes,
remember?
He did.
I hope he's listening now.
Me too.
And it's gotten some results, and here you go.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's the most baby boomer advice, and he'll appreciate this, because I always make fun of baby boomers. But, just march in there, resume in hand, and ask for the boss and shake his hand,
Worked out here.
I can't tell you how many times my dad has told me that, but it worked out real well in this situation.
I don't think we've had Kevin Hickey on the podcast many times. Probably our most... Probably the guest we've had on the most times, come to think of it. But I don't think he realizes when it comes to employment how unique he is. We could do an entire podcast just on his hiring thing. We've talked about on this podcast several times that he and I were interviewing Mary together. I wasn't particularly impressed with her, and that's not true. Actually, I was very impressed with her. But
no, you weren't, Mike.
I was.
Okay.
You were ranked 2 on the. We saw a whole bunch of people. We came to our top 3. You were my number 2. He had you as his number 1. I wanted someone with a little bit more experience, but he saw something in you that I completely missed, and he was absolutely right, because you've brought stuff to the table that person never would have. But he's also done it with so many of his other hiring practices, and not just his hiring practices, his volunteer people. Like, I see more people who will come in through Catholic Charities as volunteers for things they didn't like, that were not what they planned on volunteering for, and then he'll see something in them and suggest them for another role, which they will then take. And then from time to time, he even ends up hiring them full time because they end up showing such great, ability.
He has very good judgment.
He really does. In his case, I can't claim this for everybody. In his case, I really do think oftentimes it's the Holy Spirit working through him, because
that's what he'll say too.
And I think he might be right, because he keeps himself very open to new ideas. And in this line of work, I'm a boss. It's difficult sometimes to decide who you're going to hire. I've learned a lot actually from Kevin Hickey because of that, and being kind of open-minded and seeing beyond maybe what you first see. And so this is another example of the greatness that is Catholic Charities, Diocese of Camden, and its executive director.
We could have a whole
Kevin
series
Hickey.
of podcasts about the greatness of Kevin Hickey.
But more importantly, people like Kevin Hickey and Catholic Charities are why we get to talk to people like Vinnie right now.
And it's a great place to volunteer, too, because Catholic Charities has been very supportive from top to bottom of us running our program and finding the space for us. It's hard to find space to run these classrooms sometimes, and giving us the resources and giving us what we need so we can keep doing this amazing work.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but this is a topic that I feel like, I don't know if we've ever talked about on this podcast before, but last time I talked to you, Vinnie, we had a conversation about it, and you agreed to talk about it, but you mentioned that you adopted one of your kids, and I didn't know that. I've seen your kids before, and I thought that was interesting, but I never got the full story, and, I feel like that's something that's kind of sensitive, and, maybe some people aren't willing to talk about, but you said you were open to chatting about it, and of course that's, something that is important to Catholicism, and so we wanted to just ask you a few questions about it.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Can you just tell us about your family?
Yeah, sure.
So I know you have 3 kids. And
that's right. Yeah, so adoption's been a real blessing for us, and thanks for inviting me on here to talk about this. So, general disclaimer, of course, like with an adoption, there's they call it the adoption triad. There's 3 different groups, right? There's the birth family, there's the child to be adopted, and the adoptive family. right? I'm an adoptive dad, so I can tell you what it's like to be an adoptive dad. I can't speak for adopted children. I can't speak for birth parents and stuff, but I'll tell you the best I can from my perspective.
Yeah.
So my wife, Allison, and I, we met in college, and we were both very involved in the Catholic Center, and that sort of helped shape our relationship and our life. So we were very open to life. We wanted to have kids, and we talked a little about adoption when we were in college. But we planned on having biological kids, however it's going to work out. And so after college, we got married, and we started trying to start a family. And we were trying to conceive, and it wasn't super easy for us to conceive. But eventually we had our first child, my daughter Gianna, who's now 10.
Oh.
And a couple of years after she was born, we were trying to conceive again, and it wasn't happening. And we also became pregnant, but lost the baby very early in the pregnancy. And so after that, we said, we were talking to Allison's doctors, and they were saying to go further, we could go to fertility specialists. And we felt like adoption was a loving choice that we may be called to and wanted to explore, so we didn't go any further down the medical route there, and we decided to just go look into adoption. And so we spent next few months going through the whole process of first prayerfully discerning if we wanted to adopt or not, and learning about adoption and doing the reading and doing the background checks and the paperwork and the financials.
Must be such a process.
It's
I
a
can
big
only
process.
imagine.
It was about 9 or 10 months.
Oh, my
people
goodness.
sometimes call it their paperwork pregnancy because it goes. That's almost on the short end. But so we went through this whole process, and so we got to the point finally where we were all set and ready to adopt. And then one day we got the call from the adoption agency that a woman who was 7 months pregnant was expecting a baby to be born in 2 months, and she would like to place the baby with us. And so we were thrilled about that. And then that was on a Monday. Then on that Wednesday, I went out to a meeting, and I came home from the meeting, and my wife was sitting on the couch, and she looked a little concerned, and I was a little worried. And I asked what was going on, and she told me she took a pregnancy test. And so my reaction, I'm not proud of this reaction, but it's a very human reaction. She said, I took a pregnancy test. And I said, why did you do that? and so, so I pulled myself together, and I was like, it's not really being a supportive husband here. And I said, so what did the test say? She said, I'm pregnant.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
so we were really thrown off at that point. So the feelings we were having, honestly, were... we were scared and nervous about the whole thing.
Sure.
So we had lost a baby before. This was very early in the pregnancy. We weren't sure if this pregnancy was going to work out or not. And it clarified things for us. Because when that happened, we became very afraid the adoption wouldn't work out. You know, we weren't adopting at that point because we wanted another kid. We were adopting because we felt like God was calling our family in that direction.
Sure.
And we were very scared that we might lose the adoption with this pregnancy that we had.
Yeah.
So Allison went to the doctor next week to confirm the pregnancy, and she did. And so then we told, this is way too early to tell our parents or our family or friends, but we called up the adoption agency and told our social worker, we're pregnant, and can you please let this possible birth mother know? And they told her, and she was fine with it, and we were fine with it. And so my son, Ben, his birth mother gave birth to him in January of 2013, and my daughter, Francesca, who was our biological daughter, was born in July of that year. And so those two are 6 months apart.
Wow.
That
must have been such a surprise, you're going
even
through
it's so stressful too. Even right now telling the story, I'm just like, oh, I can't believe I lived through that. And it was so at that point in November when we found out Allison was pregnant, it was very early in the pregnancy, and we found out we matched up with a birth mother. I was thinking, I had one daughter, Gianna, at the time, and depending on if Allison could carry the pregnancy to term, and depending on if the birth mother placed the child with us, I would either have 1, 2, or 3 kids 9 months from that day. And I didn't know any of them.
That is mind-boggling to
Turned
even
out to be
think
3,
about.
which was great, but it was pretty nuts. Yeah.
Wow.
And we also, it worked out so great for us. And so our 2 kids, Ben and Francesca, the 2 younger ones, Ben is 6 months older. They're roughly the same age and stuff, and it's working out really great. We're so surprised when that happened, and it's a little cringy for us, honestly, that it happened too, because a lot of people say to us, oh, I heard of that happening before, and it does happen, but it's not the normal thing. People say this thing, people struggle with infertility, like, if you just relax, maybe if you just had a baby, you could conceive your own or something. It's so cringy, and we're frustrated with ourselves a little bit that it worked out like this almost, because now we're this story that we know people are telling, but this was God's plan for our family, and so it wasn't what we expected, it was what we rolled with. Which would be really great.
So that So after your wife gave birth, so then suddenly there's 2 new babies in the picture, and
I know.
that must have been a stress. Plus your other
It was so
older
funny.
daughter.
Yeah, so we have 3, and people ask me sometimes, like, I've had other friends who have had multiple kids and stuff, and they ask these questions like, what's the harder transition, 1 to 2 or 2 to 3? And I'm not really qualified to answer, because when my son Ben was born in January, they put my second child in my arms. You know, we went home, and it was like stressful sometimes with the baby and my 3-year-old, but I kept telling myself, there's going to be another baby in a couple months.
Yeah, right.
You can't be at your wit's end yet, because there's another one of these coming in just a few months.
Right. Oh my gosh.
I'm curious. Now you're many years sort of removed from it, and you can. I think listening to you, I think you're saying you're talking about this with a much clearer vision. I have to imagine at the time how little clarity did you really have, or would you say your faith actually gave you some clarity?
Yeah, our faith gave us some clarity, obviously, because these sort of things just remind you that these things are in God's hands, whether you're biological children or your adoptive children. And we were just, maybe we were just holding our breaths a lot to see how it was going to go. But yeah. I was nervous about the logistics of having that many babies and everything at once, but we were not scared of what was going to happen. We felt like Ben was going to be our son, and we felt like Francesca was going to come along and be our daughter, and it was going to work out okay.
Yeah. And how old are they now?
Right now, my oldest, Gianna, is 10, and my 2 little ones are both 7.
Okay.
Well, actually, you know what? In case Ben is listening, I have to clarify. Francesca is 7. Ben is 7.5 right now.
These are very important things.
Oh, it is. Francesca just turned 7 like last week. Mm-hmm. For 6 months of the year, Ben is 1 year older than Francesca. For 6 months, they're the same number, and for that half the year they're the same number, Ben's very specific that he's 7.5 and she is 7.
Yeah.
So does Ben know? Have you talked to him about this?
Yeah, so our adoption is an open adoption, it's called. And so open adoption really is the norm right now. So historically, a lot of times when an adoption would happen, the birth parents would place the child for adoption, the child would be placed with the adoptive family, and you'd know almost nothing about the birth family. And for a variety of reasons, that doesn't really happen that much anymore in the United States. Some of the reasons is, people started to learn that sometimes it's very difficult for birth parents to just, quote unquote, forget about it.
Sure.
Right? It's very helpful for birth parents to sometimes know what happens to this child. I had one friend that I was talking to as we went through this whole process, and she's like a generation older than me. She adopted kids who were like my age, so she adopted them in like the early 80s. And it was a closed adoption. And one day when her daughter was a teenager, she got a call from the adoption agency saying the birth mother had asked if she could contact her adoptive daughter. And so they began the process, and they sent letters. And the first time this mother talked to the birth mother on the phone, the birth mother was crying and told her that she felt guilty and worried about her child every day of her life.
Oh, wow.
Every day the birth mother felt scared, not knowing what had happened to this child, that she had loved and she had grown in her body and done this loving thing of placing it for adoption, right? And so people are learning more and more now that this is, for a lot of people, this works, And so open adoption, what does that mean? It means that the adopted child knows something or has some contact with their birth parents, right? Yeah. And so that can be a whole range of things. In some cases, it's just letters. Yeah. In some cases, the birth parents may be like family members for the family. And so for us, we were very open about it all the time from the beginning. Like my daughter Gianna was about 2 when Ben was about to be born, and we just, 2-year-olds, they accept the world as it is, right? So we told Gianna, we said, well, you're gonna have a baby brother, and this nice lady here, the baby in her belly is going to be your brother. And she was like, that's fine. And Ben has always known. His birth mother has been around a lot. So we first met her through the adoption agency before he was born, when she was about 7 months pregnant. And then we met with her a couple more times. We've met her parents and her brother, who are all like extended family members right now. We met them before. And then when Ben was born, Allison was actually there in the delivery room. I was downstairs in the hospital when he was born, and we've been in regular contact with his birth mother all the way through.
Wow.
So for example, my daughter had a birthday last week, and we had a Zoom birthday party where like cousins and stuff called in, and Ben's birth mother was there.
Wow.
And she called in too and hung out with the family and stuff. So yeah, very much part of the family. And it's very, the kids all know. We talk about it and stuff.
So there was never a conversation where you kind of just broke this to him when he was old. He just kind of grew up with this understanding.
That was our goal, hopefully, right? That we wouldn't have to break it to him, or
I never
it's not
even
something
imagined
to be ashamed
that.
of.
I pictured it as this difficult conversation that you one day have when they're, I don't know, 12, but you know.
That's happened a lot, and it's happened for a lot of people. But in our situation, this seemed to make a lot of sense. I mean, she loves him a lot, and she's a great person. We love having her in all of our lives. And it makes it easier for him to understand. He knows it's nothing to be ashamed of on either end. We all know, so I said we explained to my daughter the adoption thing, and as they're growing up, the kids are realizing it's not typical, right, to have a birth parent around or to even be adopted. But it's a thing that happens a lot. And so she's on all of our lists for a Mother's Day. We send cards to the grandmothers and the godmothers and the birth mother. And at one point earlier, one of my daughters was saying oh, Ben's got a birth mother, but I don't have a birth mother. My wife was like, that's me. I'm your birth mother. You got me. And she's like, no, I would like another one, like a different birth. Yeah, right.
You may not be able to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you referred to an adoption that occurred in the 80s, or someone you knew that adopted in the 80s. I've gotten the impression of particularly the last 10 or 20 years, maybe the last 10 years, that when we were growing up, I'm a little older than you and much older than Mary, there always seemed to be a stigma around adoption, that I really feel like the shame that was sometimes associated with adoption has really dissipated. I mean, it's a completely different mindset. Most of us, when we think of adoptions, we think of teenage pregnancies and things like that. And, we've been seeing over the last couple of years that people seem to be a lot more comfortable of one of two things. A lot more comfortable if they get pregnant out of wedlock, keeping the child, as well as turning the child over for adoption. In your research and in your conversations with other people, do you get the impression that is something, a reality?
Yeah, I think so. So, my wife and I started learning about adoption a lot as we were going through the adoption process. So we were reading all the modern literature on it, which is very oriented towards open adoption and has this much less shame-associated thing. But then, so we were thinking like that. We're going to the classes they prepare you for when you become an adoptive parent at the agencies and everything. And then we'd have conversations with people, and you could see their thoughts were much more old-fashioned about it. It wasn't obvious to us until we started expanding. And we have to remember that sometimes, too, when we talk to other people, because it's very natural for our family to talk about this. But this isn't something that people understand or experience. And I think you're right. I think the way people have thought about it has changed. I think in the past, unfortunately, not everyone, but people would put a lot of blame on the birth mother or a lot of blame and shame on the child when the birth mother is making a very loving choice for placing a child for adoption, if that's her choice to do. Yeah. And it's obviously not the child's fault, And I think there definitely was more shame associated with it before, probably too, in some cases, secrecy suggests shame. Right? If
that's a really good point.
Yeah, if we have government policies and families are like, we don't talk about that. People pick up on that. If we don't talk about that, it's probably something shameful, right? And so those things probably go together. And if it's something we're okay to talk about, we have boundaries, of course, people's privacy concerns and stuff in our family, but it's not something we have to play down or not embrace, because we don't want to communicate to our adoptive children that they should feel shame. Yeah. Right.
I happen to be friends and acquaintances with a number of social workers that work in the foster and adoptive care world, and talking to them, it's strange because it's a completely bizarre circumstance. I mean, there's, like you were saying, the pregnancy paperwork, right, or paperwork pregnancy. It is an incredible journey you have to go through, whether you're trying to adopt or through foster care or open your house up as foster care, like my wife and I did for a period of time, or if you're going down that adoption route. And each state's a little different. Each service provider is a little different. There are nonprofits, there are for-profits. I'm curious, when you were doing all of your research, was there anything that was leading you in any particular area in terms of your the manner in which you were going to adopt?
Yeah, there's so many choices, right? And I guess it's different for everybody, right? There's no, especially in open adoption, there's no two adoptions that are exactly alike. There's so many choices to work through, right? Which is really overwhelming when you're starting. And so we decided the first choice for us was like international adoption or domestic adoption. And we decided domestic. We just felt like we were called towards that. And then to choose an agency next, right? Because different agencies do it different ways. And so we went with an agency called Bethany Christian Services, which was really great. They had an office close to us. And we liked it because we liked the way they talked about adoption. And, frankly, we're both Catholic. So this is a Protestant organization. You can tell it's a Protestant organization, but they were a Christian organization at least. And some of the agencies that talk about it in a very secular way, I knew we'd have to answer questions about why we were adopting and what our family dynamics were. And I felt like I wouldn't know how to talk about that without talking about God and Jesus. I wouldn't be able to fill out the paperwork. Why do you want to adopt without talking about God and Jesus? We felt comfortable with Bethany, which we used. And we learned about them. They seemed to be also this was important to us too, very focused on the birth parents or birth mother, depending on the situation. We wanted a child, if that's what God wanted for us, but we also wanted to make sure we had an agency that had a good perspective on it and really understood this was about taking care of this child and the birth parents, and that we shouldn't be their top priority.
Right.
Some agencies, when you're like looking at the literature and stuff, and you start getting all sorts of ads when you're naming some of these lists, some of the agencies, it felt a little like, to be crass, it felt a little like they were saying, give us money and we'll get you a baby, right? And that's not really what we want. We want something that felt more like, if we want to help build families, right? And if God's plan includes you adopting, that'd be great. We'll do that. So we really like that. So the choices we went through, it's funny you mentioned that. So I think it helps you work backwards from what the agency tries to do to birth, or what they try to provide for birth mothers. So if a birth mother comes in, sometimes a birth father comes in too, sometimes it's just the birth mother, and wants to place a child for adoption, she comes into the office and says, I'd like to place the child, and they say, okay, and they start with the paperwork, and once those processes are set, and they learn about her, they say, okay, we have 4 or 5 families ready to adopt your baby right now. And so they hand her these like homemade books. They're like 8 or 9 page like Word documents the families made, basically, where they show what their family's like. And then she gets to take these 4 or 5 books and spend some time with them. And if she really feels like her child may match in one of these families, then she goes and meets with the family. And then she goes ahead and places the child when the child comes. And so for them to get to that point where they have those books, the adoptive parents had to be prepared and ready to go, right? So we went through this months-long process of all like the background checks and interviews and all sorts of things. And then you have to make your book. Before you do that, they don't want a birth mother to come in and choose a family, and then the family says, no, we don't want this situation or whatever, right? So they have you go down this list of all the possible situations a birth mother may come in with. So they know, is this family okay if their adoption profile is shown to a birth mother? And so this whole list of things you can think about, right? They say, is it okay if the child's a different race from you? Is it okay if it's either gender? Is it okay with everything you possibly imagine? Is it okay if the birth parents are married or if they're not married? Or is it okay if the birth mother's a smoker? Everything you could possibly imagine. Answer all these questions.
Must be endless.
It's a very long list, and you have to reflect a lot too, right? About what sort of situations are we willing to take on, right? How open are we to this? So, and for each one of those things on the list, there's 3 choices. You could say, yes, that's fine. If someone comes in with that, show them my profile. You could say, maybe, which means if someone comes in with that, before you give them my book, give us a call, tell us the details, and we'll tell you if you should show that to this birth mother or not. Or you could just say, no, if someone comes in, don't even tell them about me, it's fine. And so my wife and I, we took a very, we're Catholics, we're open to life, and we were saying, well, we're going to be very open to this. And so we said yes for a lot, and we said we're going to see what God's plan is for our family. We said maybe for a couple things, and there's only one thing we said absolutely no for on this whole list of like 100 things. The one thing we said absolutely no for was no twins.
Oh,
that's a true story.
We said,
we prayed about it. We said God wants to be open life. We're open to every situation we can imagine in some capacity, but not twins. A little bit, I know. But the funny is, we said no twins, and we get a match. And then we we there's another one 6 months behind this one. So
wow.
God will decide what you'll get.
I know. So yeah,
oh my gosh.
There are lots of things to think through the choices, and we learned God's plan wasn't our plan in that situation, right?
Yeah.
That's very funny. It's funny, so we went through the foster care system a couple years ago as foster parents, and listening to you tell the story, the foster care system was exactly the same way. We had same thing, lists of what would we accept, what would we not accept. Very, I wouldn't call them invasive conversations, but very detailed conversations. Our home had to be checked. We needed to meet with a social worker on a regular basis. All of our backgrounds had to go into. The bosses here had to write a letter for me. My wife's company had to do the same. We had to have medical things that make sure that we were actually healthy. We had to have psychological tests to make sure that we were not crazy. No guarantee we passed those. But the only difference is, whereas you had a little bit of time to prepare, when you're in the foster care system, you get a phone call and they say, we have a kid for you. Can you take them in an hour? And so you have to make that decision very quickly. And sometimes there wasn't even necessarily time for Jennifer and I to reflect on it. And the funny thing is, working with the state is a little more unique, I suspect, than working with Bethany. We gave them our list as well, and we might have been a little less open to certain things, usually health-related things. But one of the things we did say was, like, there was an age range and number of kids we were kind of specific on. The state of New Jersey never followed that once. We were getting, would you like a 17-year-old to have an entire family of kids? And that's not to say, if we weren't set for that. Like, our household wasn't set, literally our homes were not set for that. Our home was not set for that. So we knew there were things we had to say no to. But it ended up becoming kind of frustrating for us because we kept having to say no just for logistical reasons. Yeah. And finally, a miracle happened, and we actually had a wonderful child named Stephen stay with us for about 14 months. And it was a wonderful experience that I would never regret. Except
How old was he, Mike, when he came
to us? He was 2.5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't speak or had very limited vocal skills. But over the 14 months, we worked with him to develop those. And he was a great kid. He really became a member of the household. Yeah. But then now the other difference is, well, maybe not completely different, but usually when kids enter the foster care system, something terrible has happened. In this case, both parents had issues with drugs, and he and his much older sister were taken out of the house. But God bless them, they worked their butts off, and they got in a much better place, and he was allowed to go back with them. I've often said that March 17th used to be one of my favorite days of the year, and that ended up becoming my least favorite day of the year, because it's always a day I remember when he went back to his family. But I try to remind myself that as horrible a day as that was for me, as someone who had really grown attached to this kid, we had offered him an opportunity to stay someplace that was beneficial for him, and two,
especially during very important years.
Yeah, exactly. During those really formative years, and his parents had the opportunity. Because of that, his parents had the opportunity to get cleaned up and really do well, and God has really looked out for them. My wife, thankfully, has remained close, at least connected to his mother on Facebook and things like that, everybody does nowadays. So we get to see him and see that he's doing well, and we get stuff from the family every now. So but we actually kind of did the reverse. So when he left the household, he got a book. They said they called it a life book. Put together a life book and give it to the child when they leave, so they have something to remember of the time that you spent. Because most times you don't keep any connection with a foster child when they go back to their families. Right. But anyway, I've always remembered that as a very positive experience, and I'm glad that we had that experience. And
bittersweet one, though. I mean, that has to be very hard. You said it's very sudden with the foster care system. They call you that day, and then sometimes they get taken away that quickly.
That was right. It was within 24 hours we got a phone call, and thankfully our social worker was able to fight a little for us and said, well, he can't be returned today. Can he be returned tomorrow? So we had time to pack all of his stuff up and things like that. But that being said, I tell everybody, if you think that this is a path you're interested in going down, be it adoption through a state, adoption through a Christian company, or the foster care system, consider yourself, if you are open to it, look into it. It really is a very worthwhile endeavor. We went down this road because we had one child. We had difficulty conceiving early on, and then sort of similarly in the years since. So we kind of opened ourselves up to foster care and adoption services. But I tell everyone, if you really think that might be a possibility, go ahead and look into it. The worst that'll happen is either you'll say no or they'll say no. Mm-hmm. But be open to it, and be open to, like you were, open to what God's will might be. Because as you found out, you may not have a choice anyway.
Right.
Not exactly Irish twins, as I grew up learning about. My father and his brother were 11 months apart. My grandmother always referred to them as Irish twins.
Yeah.
But awfully close.
That's right. We hear that phrase a lot, Irish twins. I'm like, a little closer than that, actually.
And Mike, that must have been, obviously very challenging for you.
It was miserable. I was miserable for a long time.
I remember when that happened.
Yeah, I was not happy about it. It was,
but
I still always remember it fondly, and I still encourage people.
And you still gave him, that wonderful experience.
Yeah, what an amazing thing you did for him.
Yeah, and I try to remember it that way. And there's still pictures of him up all around the house and stuff like that. We still consider him a member of the house. I pray for him every night. Mm-hmm. I always look in on my son while he's sleeping, and I say a little prayer over him, and then I walk past the guest room where Stephen was at, and I always say a little prayer for him and his family, and then I crawl into bed and I go to sleep. And then I usually trip over the dog, crawl over the bed, and get into bed. But I hope the people who are listening to this, we talk about being pro-life in the Catholic Church, and
it's the most pro-life thing I think anybody can do.
It probably is, to be completely truthful with you, opening up your home to somebody else, whether it's for, I don't know how to say this exactly. There is a certain selfishness to adoption in the sense that you really do, you're opening up your house because you want another kid, quite frankly. It's rare that it's a selfless endeavor unless, someone in your family dies and the kids come to live with you. So there is a certain level of selfishness to it, but it's such a wonderful opportunity, and it's such a Catholic and Christian thing to do, to open yourself up and your home to a new person. And it's probably, quite frankly, the most Christian thing we can do is, look.
Sure.
Yeah,
and
really,
Vinnie, sorry. Were you going to say something? Has there been, if there's one big challenge or misconceptions that people might have, is there any, if you want people who aren't familiar with this process to understand one thing, is there any? I'm sure there's a long list.
Yeah, let me think. So I would say, you can totally do this. Right, sounds scary. You can do this. So I'm gonna, So yeah, Mike was saying that it's good for us as Christians to do this. I feel like it's so amazing for our souls to have this experience too, because I learned this thing about myself. My wife and I learned this thing about ourselves, which maybe intellectually understood, but when it actually happens emotionally, it's powerful and also a little scary too. So my first child was a biological child, and people say this thing, it's kind of cliche, but I think it's pretty accurate, where it's like when you have a kid, it's like your heart has left your body and is walking around. You feel so scary, vulnerable in a way, to love this person so much, right? And so then your head's around like, wow, my wife and I, our bodies can make these beautiful babies that I love so much. And then through adoption, you're given this child, in our case, by someone who's basically a total stranger. And I take this baby boy, and I love him the same as I did my other daughter, and you realize that God's built us in a way where we're capable of fully loving literally anybody, right? Anyone, we were a child. Yeah. Anyone, Ben was born, he's in a different state than we were. He's Korean. He's a different race than we are. Anyone, any baby, I'm capable of loving like a father, it turns out. And that's a really, really powerful Christian thing to experience, and also kind of a scary thing too, because anyone you see on the news living anywhere, you could have loved that person like a child. I learned as a parent, right? It's not just your biological kids. You can love anyone that much. And that's a really powerful thing for people to learn. And
I'm about to choke up just listening to this. I never even thought of it that way, but that's so true.
I wasn't planning on that exact feeling going through that, but I had that realization. I said, anyone, God built us with these hearts capable of even loving a total stranger as your child.
Do you ever get weird looks from people, or they find out, wait a minute,
probably.
6 months, what's going on here?
I've had experience a couple times, obviously, especially when I went out with the babies or whatever. And so one of them, people were like, are are they twins? And I'm like, oh, not quite. I'll say that's my first line. I know it's hard. I was like, oh, not quite. And they're like, oh, Irish twins or something. And like, what are they like 10 months apart? I'm like, actually, they're 6 months apart. Then I go 1 1,000, 2 1,000. I think we're an adoptive family because you can see everyone's face goes through the same thing where they're like 6 months apart, and they're like
see the wheels
doing the
spinning.
math, and they're like looking at them and like whatever. And then I say we're an adoptive family. Like, oh, okay. And then if they ask, I answer more questions and stuff than that.
Yeah.
It is a great opportunity. It's always a great learning opportunity. That was what I said, because we suddenly had a 2.5-year-old, and there was nothing but questions like, what is
That's right.
What's going on here?
Yeah. And he actually, the funny part was, my son is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and I'm dark-haired and dark-eyed. My wife is dark-haired and dark-eyed. Our foster child, brown hair and brown eyes. The only one that looked like us was the one who didn't look like us. Jack was the one that looked like he was adopted. But going back to what I was saying before, don't be afraid of these opportunities. Don't be afraid of anything. I always worry when I feel sad for people when they say, oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready. Oh, I'm not sure. And there's a truth to that. You do want to be ready for it. But I tell people, like, don't let the fear keep you from an opportunity like this, because you'd be amazed at what you're capable of.
Right.
So as we're wrapping up, Vinnie, thank you very much for coming on. And now we have a new adoptive expert. We appreciate that.
And I'm so glad to hear your perspective, because it's something I feel like we just don't hear about that much. But thank you so much for being so open and for joining us.
Great.
And
Thanks
you
for
too,
having me.
Mike. Thank you for sharing your experience.
That was great, Mike. Yeah, thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And thank you for setting this whole thing up, Mary, and for coming in today. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. And we will be back again next week.